Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here for our final day of the TV Summit. Sorry to interrupt Saturday morning cartoon themes, but if you really like them, ping me and I'll share my playlist. That's what I run to. I know that a lot of you have flights throughout the morning, so before we may lose some of you, I wanted to thank all of you for being here. Thank all of the speakers for really great work, some great cases, wonderful conversation. From a programmer's perspective, this is exactly what we have in mind when I program something like this. Having true insiders like you who really get to talk about what you're doing and trade stories. I would love to have more ideas. I feed off of all of you. I'd love to have more ideas for more cases for the next TV Summit. So please feel free to ping me online. Just go to MediaPost. You'll see my name everywhere. Just ping me and send me an idea. I'm always looking for them. And of course, thanks to our sponsors, without whom we cannot do this. Audience Express, Conversant, and Video Amp. Thanks very much for supporting this in its early days. A brief moment of silence. A god of television died yesterday, Chuck Barris. The inventor of the dating game, the Newlywed Game, and of course the Gong Show. And if you haven't read Chuck Barris's autobiography, one of the great autobiographies of TV history in which he claims to be a CIA assassin. And as far as I know, he went to his death insisting still that he was a CIA assassin all the years that he was producing all of those game shows. It's amazing. One reminder again, because a lot of you are working in the programmatic and data-driven fields, we're doing our Data and Programmatic Summit on April 23rd through the 26th on Captiva Island. We have a ton of case studies from some great brands, Staples, IAMS, T. Rowe Price, Motorola, Warner Music, as well as the Republican National Committee, which did some remarkable work. You're going to hear some of the kinds of things that political marketers did in this last campaign from Will in a second, but we're going to have the Chief Data Officer and the Head of Advertising for the Republican National Committee talking about some of the stuff that they were doing with data-driven digital display, especially in Facebook, which is a pretty amazing story. A reminder, if you're interested in coming, we're pretty much full with speaker spots, but we do have a VIP program that is open to agencies that are working in the space. So if you're interested, let us know. And of course, the videos for over the last few days, they're all up. From the last 2 days, they're already up online, and today's will be up later today. We have been tracking at MediaPost for the last 4 years political marketing. We've been ourselves interested in the ways in which the disciplines cross over. Even though there's not a lot of conversation across these two fields, we've been holding every year in Washington our political marketing event, where we ask campaign professionals to come in and talk about the ways in which they've been using the digital channels. And part of this, of course, comes from our understanding that a lot of the disciplines, in fact, many of the disciplines that you have been talking about over the last few days, many of them really originated in political marketing. A lot of the stuff around index-based TV buying, for instance, really started way back, as Will be able to tell us, way back in the early 2000s, especially in the 2004 Bush campaign. Will Feltus is the SVP of National Media. He has worked on multiple presidential campaigns. He is among the pioneers of a lot of these techniques that you've been talking about over the last few days. He's also the co-author of Inside Campaign Elections Through the Eyes of Political Professionals. He went around and interviewed over 100 political professionals about the ways in which they pull the levers for media and marketing for political campaigns. Please welcome Will Feltus.
Thanks, Steve. But thank you for the intrepid survivors of the conference who are still here, the remnant inventory of. So, very briefly, let me tell you something about me first, because people are interested in my politics. So I'm a libertarian Republican. Started out working for Daddy Bush in '79 when he ran against Reagan in the primary, and then worked for Reagan in '84 and pretty much every presidential campaign except for Bob Dole. but I'm sort of a Bush Republican. That puts me on the spectrum. So what I want to talk about now is, I think we need to start out about how political marketing and consumer marketing are different. Then we want to see what we have in common and if there are any lessons that we can learn from one another. But first I want to start out with the mandatory Washington anecdote. So Steve plugged my book. Do not buy this book. This is a textbook intended for college students. But one of my co-authors, Ken Goldstein, the University of San Francisco, runs a program in DC for college students from California. They come to DC. So he called me up a few weeks ago and he said, Will, we'll give you a nice honorarium if you'll come talk to 300 California college students. I said, well, I can't do it. I'm going to be in California. But my trusted colleague, Ben Angle, who ran the Trump media buying, he can come. So they put out this announcement that a Trump media buyer is coming. Oh my God. The college students went wild. So when Ben shows up, so this is the first instance of a media buyer being protested by college students. Ask me how I've been affected by Trump's media. You contributed to the dissemination of hate, and then this strangely out of place sign over there in the corner, everyone is welcome here. So this is like the first difference between political and consumer advertising is the level of public scrutiny. All right, so if you're a consumer advertiser, like anything goes wrong, they freak out. Numerous meetings. On the political side, we expect to be criticized for our campaign, and we love to be criticized by the losers because that means we won, right? A more substantive difference is like the purchase window. So if you're a consumer marketer, like the store or the website's always going to be open tomorrow. There's always the next quarter. In politics, it's one day the store's open, or in states where there's early voting, maybe 2 or 3 weeks absentee voting. And then it's closed forever. So this is one of the reasons you see campaigns dumping so much money at these wasteful point levels, 1,000 points a week, 1,200 points a week. In the last weeks of a campaign, because no campaign wants to end up on the day after election with money still in the bank. It's hard for campaigns to know what's actually working. So if you're a consumer marketer, you have your daily sales data, the scanners telling you what's going on. You can track the sale back to the individual person. In politics, we have this secret ballot problem. So we don't actually know who bought the product. We can only guess. And while the campaign's going on, we have to rely on polling and the field work where people go out and contact individual voters. And we saw in the last cycle that can be very unreliable, that people lie to pollsters. And it's hard to do survey. My background's in survey research. Back when I was a child in the 80s, we would, the response rate on a telephone survey was, it was probably close to 30%. People liked to tell you their opinion. Now, on a traditional telephone interview, you get response rates in the single digits. The bar for political campaigns is higher. So you can make a lot of money in your business with just a single-digit market share. You can be a profitable campaign. In our business, you ultimately have to be number one in the category, or you fail. I love my consumer clients. I feel like I'm not doing anything because you can plan it, you send in the checks, and it's there. Like maybe you have a little money in reserve and you'll look for some special opportunities, but you can negotiate with the networks. They'll cut the prices. They'll give you audience guarantees. In politics, you have none of that. We try hard to get our clients out of the week-by-week trap. Campaigns don't know how much money they're going to have. I mean, they're out raising money, and they give it to us, and we spend it, and we have no negotiating leverage when it comes to rates. We can cut off a station if we want to. There's complicated rate cards that they change daily. Like you'll put in a buy, you get the rate card on Tuesday, put in a buy on Thursday, and the rep calls you up and says, oh, we've changed the rates. And the rates always go up. They never go down. This little graph over here on the side, we did Romney's first presidential campaign in the primary, and this is the rate, the so-called lowest unit rate, which may or may not actually exist. And at WMUR in New Hampshire, it went up 200% in the 11 months before the primary. The lowest unit rate is a law. The federal government passed a law. Congressmen and senators passed this law to guarantee themselves the lowest rate charged to preferred advertisers. And it only kicks in like 45 days before the primary and 2 months before the general. You really get ripped off if your client is a super PAC, an independent expenditure organization. Stations are obligated to take advertising for candidates for federal office. They are not obligated to take super PAC advertising. So this is the cherry on the sundae for political campaigns. They charge us 3 to 4 times nowadays. 10 years ago, they might charge you a 25% premium. But now, this is where they stick it to you. And then a big difference between what you do and what political marketers do is confidentiality. So as soon as we place an order, everybody knows. It has to be released and put in the public file. And in fact, there's a system has grown up over the years. It used to be that you would, the stations would share information with you to get you to spend more with them. Hey, your opponent just put $100,000 down and you only have 50. Maybe you want to give us another 50 so you won't be behind. But now the stations and rep firms they email out what everybody's doing as soon as it happens. So that's a huge pain in the butt for us. We have to spend lots of money. Like we have our own political competitive tracking software. And we have kids that sit there all day and enter in the orders. And our clients are looking at our screens to figure out what their opponents are doing. And then they call us up and want to tinker with their buy. Another big thing is trafficking. People produce political ads constantly. I mean, a consumer spot, I don't know how much they cost. I mean, I can't believe it. People spend $500,000 producing a spot. What is it really 10 times better than my $25,000 spot, which is the typical cost of a political spot? And they look like it, right? It's some guy up all night using clip art, to to make a spot. But look at the number of spots that were aired. This is just in September, October, and early November. So we have to traffic all this stuff. And it's very hard to get the attention of the traffic person who is overwhelmed at these stations. I mean, it's very low tech. We fax them a thing and said, put your initials on here that you've gotten this and fax it back to us. And if they don't, then we have kids that call them up and say, did you get the traffic? Because there's nothing worse than a client seeing their ad that's not supposed to be up anymore. If you look at the third-party advertising here, look how negative it is. So the third-party ads always tend to be negative. The ratio of positive to negative between the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign is pretty much the same. And just to let you know, like the spending in 2016, so during June and August, Clinton and her third-party allies like crushed Trump. Trump's spending was only about 18% of the Clinton operation. The gap narrowed in September, November, so we got the call from the Trump people sometime in early September. They called us up and wanted us to do their advertising because we had done presidential campaigns before. I did not work on the Trump campaign. I was under the political laws. I was firewalled off because I'd worked for independent expenditure campaigns, so I was not allowed to work on the Trump campaign. The first thing that Ben, who was protested by the college students, did was to go network, which was a smart move. And when he called the networks asking for federal candidate presidential rates, like they didn't know what to do. They said, we're going to have to talk to our lawyers because we don't know how to price this. And the best thing about networks is they take the lowest unit rate very seriously. So we've been doing campaigns for network campaigns for consumer marketers, corporate image campaigns. And we knew what we were paying for them. And then when we saw the lowest unit rate, it's like, wow, that is really low. Like, for example, the lowest unit rate for a network spot on the Sunday morning Stephanopoulos show was $7,500. If you bought that spot just in the DC market, it was $15,000. So the Trump campaign ended up putting a higher percentage of their money on network than we've seen in the last few years, which is a smart move. I mean, campaigns used to buy almost all network. I remember I was the communications director in the ill-fated Bush Quayle '92 campaign, and it's one of the last times that we had a Madison Avenue team. So we had our Madison Avenue dudes, and they said, well, we're behind everywhere, so we're just going to buy network. There was no spot TV. The Clinton guys put most of their money into local markets. And ever since then, presidential campaigns have been dominated by local market advertising, but the local market rates have gotten so high that network is looking attractive again. And it is a presidential election. I mean, it's nice for Republicans in California to see a Republican spot, which they rarely do. If some of you are unfortunate enough to live in Ohio or Florida, Colorado, these swing states, we apologize to you for all the ads you have to look at. And when you look at these spending totals, remember that each third-party dollar is worth maybe a third of what a candidate dollar is because of the higher rates we have to pay. Management. So your clients know what they're doing. Right? They can actually tell you the definition of a gross ratings point. Political managers, these are short-term organizations. They're not marketing people. They don't have vice presidents of advertising, so they depend on us to do that for them. The way campaigns run, it's still old school, right? So you've got your creative wizard, who's often a semi-celebrity. You've got some, bean counter assistant, and then the media buyer, like he probably never even meets the client. He's just the way to pay the big shot in a lot of campaigns. I don't do that sort of stuff. What we've seen in the last few years is that in Bush in 2000, 2004, and Trump in 2016 went to what looks more like a consumer model, where you have separate creative and media buying and planning teams. McCain was old school, and so was Romney in 2012. On the Democratic side, I can't tell you how separate they are. I mean, our best Democratic friends is an agency called GMMB in DC, and we talk to them all the time. In fact, I called Danny Jester to check those spending numbers just on Friday. He's now at Disneyland with his kids. So they have they're very big, and they have within the agency the creative side and the media side. I don't know how independent they are from one another. Product development. So you guys go sell the product that's already made. The campaign has to make the product and sell it. And marketing is, in the book, we outline, based on our survey, the 10 sort of jobs of a campaign manager. And marketing is only one of them. Most of these other jobs have to do with making the product to sell. And then finally, in your campaigns, like advertising is it. Almost all the information that a potential customer gets comes from what you tell them. On politics, it is not that way at all. That there are sources of information coming from the media, from news events. The other campaign is attacking you. Third parties are attacking you. Even your own allies put up a spot. If you're a campaign, you cannot talk to an independent expenditure organization. They can only guess what you want them to do. And one of the ways they guess that is by looking at the competitive. So a campaign will go in and lay down an order in some markets and leave the other markets bare. And that way your third-party friends know, oh, hey, we have to go into those markets and take care of it. But you can't control that. You don't know what they're going to say or do. And candidates are not brands. Everybody talks about the Trump brand. Well, that's true for his hotels. But political parties might be brands, but candidates aren't brands. I mean, like the Gecko does not change the script or say something he shouldn't have said, or he doesn't tweet. Flo is pathetic in new progressive auto spot. All right, so enough of what the difference is. So here's some in common stuff. So this is Steve said that we started doing this political research, political media research, basically didn't exist like before about 2001. There was ad testing. When I was a pollster, that's what I started out doing, was testing ads, which is copy testing, and forced exposure, groups of 30 or so. In fact, our firm, we were the first ones to use those dials that made Frank Luntz unfortunately famous. But there was no media research. In fact, I remember in the 80s going to Nielsen and saying, how much would it cost if you added on your questionnaire partisanship and propensity to vote? It was in the 80s, and they came back and said, like, this was for Reagan in '84, and they said like $6 million. And said, well, we'll just keep buying 35 plus. So that persisted until by accident I met this really smart guy named Bob Cohen, who ran Scarborough Research, which I'd never heard of. And I'm just sitting in this meeting with him, and I'm flipping through his questionnaire, and there it is. He's asking party ID on a 6-point scale. He's asking, how often do you vote in presidential, statewide, and local elections? And he's asking 200,000 adults a year this, along with all their media behaviors. And I said, well, Bob, like, what do you guys do with this data? And he says, well, nobody does anything with it. He said, I used to work at Yankelovich, and I felt like it was my obligation to put some political stuff on my questionnaire. And I said, can you let me use the data for a few months? And I think I can arrange to have it bought. So that was 2001. And there was a feeling that the 2000 election had been a little close, that we maybe on the Republican side, we did Bush's buy, that we needed to come up with something new to do. So I went to Rove, and Matthew Dowd and the RNC started paying us to look at this data. And just like for consumer marketing, there are two variables that are most important. There's consumption and preference. So consumption is turnout. How often do you buy the product? How often do you vote? And brand preference, do you like Democrat or Republican? So you can put like everybody in the country in this space. It's hard to read the labels at the top. But the top row are people who vote, who say they vote. People over-report. But you see the people that vote, the big bubbles are out on the sides. So if you are interested in the game, you pick a team. There are fewer people in the middle. Down at the bottom, the people that don't vote, they're more likely to say, I don't have a party preference. So then we put in this space, how do they use media? So these are the top 2 quintiles, which consume anywhere from 70 to 80+% of that media. And this is the first problem that we learned in 2001, is that, damn, Democrats are watching more TV than our voters. So we typically, the Democrats are getting like depending on the market, like a 15%, as you guys say, lift by doing nothing. You can find Democratic voters on television pretty much any time of the day, and it's cheaper to reach Democrats than it is to reach Republicans. We have to buy expensive prime time, expensive sports to find our voters. Interesting, people are surprised that the internet skews a little bit Republican, because Al Gore invented it and Obama got elected with it, and like all the dudes with the square glasses, they're obviously Democrats. Just one more, like you see that top 20% over there is very Democratic. The second quintile is a little bit more on our side. So we realized that you can't beat the other side. You can't gain an impression advantage just by buying more and more television. We have to diversify our media mix and buy smarter. So we were doing all this research We bought the Bush. We tested it in 2002 in a Texas Senate race. We decided it worked. So we did our buy in 2004 based on this kind of research. And we kept it secret. We didn't say anything, which is, people don't do that anymore. They put out a press release, before they have a client. But then after it was over, I was instructed which New York Times reporter to go to and brag about it, giving most of the credit, to Karl Rove and Matthew Dowd. So in 2000, all three networks had a slight Republican skew. My little pointer looks better on the ceiling. So here we are in 2000. So Fox is more Republican, but even CNN, was slightly right of center. And since then, you can see what's happened. It's like the universe is flying apart. In 2016, look, like MSNBC has kind of inched back a little bit toward the center. So has CNN. Fox is, you can't go much further. At some point, you run into the wall. Like Fox Business is over here somewhere. It's interesting, and remember what I said, like the people that care about politics are more likely to vote, and you can see that, like the Fox people, the turnout has gone up for Fox viewers, and also in MSNBC. These are the two most partisan networks. So they're attracting higher turnout voters, and CNN is in the middle. The CNN people hate this chart when I show it to them. They there's something wrong with that chart, Will. No. Here's some other networks. Okay, there's MSNBC over there, up in the corner. Fox News is off this chart. The Golf Channel, very Republican. The good thing about this data is that when you see it, it makes intuitive sense. So this is Scarborough data, but we also use MRI, and we also have a national voter file with modeled partisanship and turnout data that a company i360 does, and we've matched that against the national Nielsen panel, and you pretty much get the same results when you do this. There's some differences, but you can figure out a pattern to it. And we're a fairly small agency, so all our lead media planners and buyers know how to do this research, which is different. So if we're doing a buy in a certain market, they go in there. Is my time up? Can I stop? All right, now let me go fast. Look at most of the news programs. They're Democratic. PBS NewsHour, Nancy Grace. There's the Fox guys over there. Prime time. It's changed a little bit. Republicans, we saw, they would watch shows where the government and the police were the good guys, like NCIS and when. Democrats, you can see the most Democratic skewing primetime show is Empire. All right, lessons to be learned. This has nothing to do with TV buying. Is that consumer marketers need to understand the partisanship and politics of their consumers, and also their employees if you're a big company. Because you never know when you're going to get sucked into politics, especially these days, right? So here's retail. There's Nordstrom, very high turnout, somewhat in the middle. As I recall, they were recently in the news. Talbots, Eddie Bauer, you got your Republican preppies over here, right? Dick sporting, honey, go get some paint. And then Foot Locker, Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus, which I hear is for sale, skewing more Democratic. Restaurants, Chick-fil-A. Remember Chick-fil-A a few years ago when they got in trouble because they're closed on Sunday, and their CEO had mixed feelings about same-sex marriage, and so they organized a boycott against them, and Chick-fil-A customers are going, hey, we don't care. We're over here. Cracker Barrel, very Republican. Second lesson is you need to learn how to reach opinion leaders. So we have this model where we use like 30 so variables in Scarborough data, and you can't read this, but it's hardwired. We have it hardwired into Scarborough. If you're our client, you can see it. But like the markets with the most opinion leaders, DC, San Francisco, Boston, it's all behavioral data. It's not demographic. So it's how much news you consume and how involved you are. Do you vote? Do you volunteer? Do you donate? And you need to know how to find these people quickly. So like here's sports by opinion leaders. So the highs, like NCAA women's basketball, men's tennis, golf. These are places that we advertise for our corporate image advertisers. Now at this point, I would usually end with like some globally interesting thing, but last night after like a couple of margaritas, I decided that what you really needed to see was alcoholic beverage consumption by partisanship. So Republicans, as we we're evil, so we prefer dark liquors, right? And Democrats, they're transparent, so they're drinking vodka and gin. Republicans drink more light beer. Democrats drink more real beer. You can't see this. These are brands. This chart was actually published in Wine Spectator. So here's the audience participation bonus question. And if you can answer this question, you will get a free textbook, a $50 value. What is the most Republican soft drink? Who said Dr. Pepper? Okay, you win. But you don't win exactly. It's Diet Dr. Pepper. So you will get the book. And so you can see that Democrats are drinking more sugared soft drinks. Republicans, we're supposed to be healthy, I guess. I don't know. All right, so ask me a question.
Okay. Well, all right. I
Is
have a
this
question.
being streamed live?
All right. If we're overlaying political affinities to brand identity, are there? And since we're engaged in a much more partisan atmosphere, are we seeing aversions to brands?
I don't think so. I mean, a lot of the partisanship of brands can typically be explained. Dr. Pepper started in Texas, right? So in the 60s, Dr. Pepper would have been very Democratic, right? But the South became Republican, so now Dr. Pepper drinkers are Republican. I think brands, should stay out of politics unless you get sucked in. I mean, maybe Starbucks. It's very tempting for brands to get, some types of brands to get into politics. They feel like they need to express themselves. But before they do that, they should understand the partisanship of their customers.
Yeah, so question. I'm a big fan of the role that dark media is increasingly playing for all brands. And my question for you is,
What's dark media?
dark media is media we don't measure and see, so it's not reflected in Scarborough. So it would be everything from, peer-to-peer, email, SMS platforms, but also things like news groups like Reddit or 4chan, new media like Snapchat that aren't even reflected in these. So a lot of them are peer-to-peer or more social or bulletin board based, but they're having a huge impact in both consumer brands and I would assume in political brands. So my question for you is, do you think there's more influence going on now in media we don't see versus the media we do see? I mean, you've done a wonderful job of delineating the most visible medium, television and other media, but are dark media playing more of a role of influence in the world?
I don't really know the answer to that question. I think that what you see in a lot of these kind of dark media is that the birds of a feather are flocking together. So the people that already have an opinion will interact with people that already have that opinion. I'm not sure how much that spreads outside. People have already made up their mind. I mean, I think, in the Trump campaign, was very successful on Facebook. I think that's not dark media. It's social media. And Google, they'll brag about that at your next conference, and I think they're due to brag. I don't know. Like my daughter's boyfriend, he loves Reddit. I've never even looked at Reddit. They're also into Bitcoin.
Yes, my question is about addressable advertising. Did you use any addressable advertising in this election?
We used it for some clients. You go back to the slide, we have to be number one in the category, so we have a reach problem with addressable advertising. Our voter file is at Dish and Direct. We've used it for corporate image advertising. I keep telling the RNC, you should use addressable to raise money. Because, if I saw some slide the other day which had some addressable number that I think is much huger than the actual number is. But you can make money off addressable for fundraising, I believe, because you can target known donors or potential donors. In terms of campaigns, we've had some of the same problems that other people have. Is that, the ads all spew out on Monday, and then you don't get the reporting back in time. Dish and Direct, we like you, but it's not a big deal in politics.
So are you familiar with Worthland, the old Worthland?
Who?
Worthland, they would do, David Worthland, he created message mapping, I think.
Are you talking about Dick Worthland?
Is it Dick Worthland?
Yeah, he was a pollster, Salt Lake City.
So I used it as an issues management when I ran Monsanto's campaign to try and sway people to understand and support genetically modified foods. And what I thought was super interesting is that you could almost group people into the way they think about it, an issue, that's something that matters to them more. Mm-hmm. And I was interested to see if addressable advertising can be used to essentially send a creative that speaks to you for the reason that you're supporting the candidate.
Yeah, I mean that's the promise of addressable advertising, is to send separate messages to separate people. In a political campaign, there are a lot of messages, but just the execution of that right now is much better done online or through emails than it is on TV. And TV's a mass medium. We do all this stuff to try to get a 10 to 25% improvement and reach against the target audience. But when these guys are spending, when they're buying like 1,000 or 1,200 points a week, you're not going to get much efficiency because you're forced to buy, crap that you don't really want to.
Oh, yeah, if...
Oh, you want your book?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
$50 value, did I mention that?
So I want to make sure it doesn't go away. So if polling is becoming less and less effective over time, the percentage of people dropping who want to participate and their answers are even suspect, how are people trying to compensate for that? Is there anything emerging in political campaigns that people are now looking to that's different from polling?
Well, the answer we thought, and the Democrats especially thought, was in data modeling. So you would go out and contact voters that you thought were your supporters. You would ask them a few questions, and then every day that goes back into the file, and they run their models again. And based on those models, they were absolutely certain they were going to win. And the Trump people had no idea at all they were going to win. Right. So that's the fun of politics.
Will's going to continue this leading the roundtable on this at the end of the morning. Thank you very much, Will, for coming and being a part of the last few days. Throughout the last few days, talking about the various platforms and going into it, understanding the inherent limitations of them, to focus instead on how people are making do within those limitations, how they are, in the case of this panel, how they're solving for the inherent limitations of addressable, trying to get around them, trying to complement them with other media. To take the lead on this panel, we have Noah Dyer, who's VP of Marketing Strategies of On Advertising, a local agency. Noah, take it away.
All right, thanks for having me. Anybody else from Phoenix in town? Hey, great. Glad to have some company. So I'm really excited to be up here on the stage with these folks. We've got some real rock stars representing diverse viewpoints. So first we have Natalie. She is the queen of all things DirecTV, or rather Dish. Bad word. Dish and Sling. I'm teasing. She works on Addressable. She works on a lot of their other platforms. She has been there for quite some time. Before that, she was at A&E, working there for a while. She is award-winning in many regards. She's been recognized as a rising star of women in cable and many other things. So, Natalie, welcome. Then we have Max here. Max is with VSA Partners. He has the distinction of being very broadly based, not only responsible for TV, but also for other digital initiatives there. Some big clients, including Google, and working Addressable along with all of the other media in the mix. And Craig from Havas. And Craig is a bigwig on the agency side for TV buying. He, his team has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in his tenure there, working with lots of companies, including Sleep Number, AARP, and lots of experience. So we've got some great and diverse experience up here on the stage. And the first thing that we wanted to do is a lot of times terms get confused, and we've seen a little bit here where advanced TV, like programmable and addressable and OTT, they're all kind of just used as synonyms of each other. So I wanted to give an opportunity to our panelists here to clarify, like, where do we draw the line? What is addressable versus index-based buying and so on?
So I can start. So first off, I mean, if you guys have been here the last 3 days, we've all heard the term addressable. But can I see a show of hands of those who have bought or leveraged addressable? Tracy's hand super high. Okay, so being from Dish, just a little background on Addressable. We launched back in 2012, and really Addressable is all about leveraging our set-top box data and building targets against it. And we differentiate that very differently. We leverage programmatic in an automated fashion. So for us, programmatic is really just implementing and streamlining the process of Addressable. And we launched a programmatic platform back in October of 2015, which is a growing platform itself. But as Max, I'm sure, will go deeper into programmatic, there's still a lot of work to be done in the space. Do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, so I like to think of addressable just as targeting a specific household versus, index-based buying. I think traditionally we think about TV advertising as finding an audience and determining if it's the right place for you. And addressable and programmatic is kind of taking the next leap to think about TV advertising in a way that, how do we eliminate waste and target the specific individuals that we're trying to reach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they covered a lot of it. The way that we kind of, I guess you could say, joke around about it is, it's more programmanual than programmatic in our space. And so there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes with the indexing. And, we do a lot of that as an agency in-house with the planning team. But utilizing the platforms is still something that we see fit. And then tying it back to the addressable aspect, we just look at that as kind of more, enriched with data. And I think we've talked a lot about the first party data and third party and even second party. So.
All right, very good. So the first question I wanted to ask you guys is kind of paint the vision. What is the most innovative use you've seen of addressable ad buying? We can reverse it now. Why don't we work it back?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. So, at Havas Edge, we're a performance-based marketer. We're really the direct-to-consumer arm of Havas. So this addressable space, advanced TV space, is somewhat newer for us. I know it's new in general, but the DR market has been more active, I'd say, in the last 3 years. So I'm just going to talk about something that I've worked on rather than what I've heard or read in the trades. So for us, we had a financial advertiser that was having a hard time scaling on TV. Their target was adults 50 plus. We couldn't really get them past news, but they were looking at a top of the funnel metric. We were able to go a little deeper with them and explore kind of some of the data that they had internally and utilize a little bit of research that they had done and we felt was supported and valid through their direct mail campaigns. In targeting, for them, it was targeting two sides, individuals with net worth and individuals with investable assets. So we broke that away to started talks of approaching an addressable campaign for them, which, the size of the campaign was significant because for them, it could have correlated to at least a week or two of media spent. But we were able to get them over the hump, approach the buy, and it's moving in a positive direction. So I thought that was kind of unique to use the different mediums, kind of put them together, and then take the approach of the investable assets, which is really what they're after at the end of the day for this particular client. So.
Very exciting. Max, go ahead.
Yeah, so at VSA Partners, we pride ourselves on being an end-to-end solution for clients running from building your brand up and defining who you are to all the way to activating and market. And one of the things we do before we activate media is decide how we're going to measure success. And we come up with those models and kind of decipher some of that before we even hit the ground running from a media planning perspective. And we have a cheese client called Board and Cheese who this year had a really interesting problem. One of their main competitors is outspending them by like 200 times what they have in a media budget. And so for them to be on TV, it's extremely important for them to be strategic and really smart about the way they're placing their dollars because they can't match their competitor dollar for dollar. They'll lose every time. So this year we basically had an opportunity to test out addressable for the first time with them. And an interesting thing came out of that where by providing an integrated solution, we found that there are benefits to every channel that you're activating on. And I think the biggest thing we took away was that because addressable is so targeted and we're able to define a specific audience, we were able to achieve much more positive ROI that was reflected in a model because we strategically placed it in a way that we were not just buying demographic data or lifestyle data. We were specifically targeting households of our competitors, and because we were doing that in a very specified period of time, we were able to see a huge return on our investment that we honestly didn't even expect. So.
Yeah, I think too, just to sum up, I mean, addressable is, what we see is that addressable is definitely one piece of just an overall media mix. We don't, when we have, we've ran over 1,000 campaigns, and we know that addressable is just one piece of that very large puzzle. What I find interesting when building case studies for our teams is the creative testing element that you can do and really dive into the transparent results behind it. One example in particular was an online brokerage firm in which they had 3 separate audiences and 2 types of creative that they wanted to target all of them. Max is laughing because I told him about this earlier. And it was a 7-week-long campaign, and what was really interesting, looking at the creative afterwards when building this case study, when you would look at the creative by the naked eye, you would never really be able to tell. The messaging was just skewed slightly. But Creative B outperformed by 213% and drove 67% lift in activations, which something like that, it's a no-brainer. And really probably the creative teams are scratching their heads of like, how could this be? So I think it shows both, whether it's negative or positive, that the transparency of the reporting can really help influence your next buy. And that same brand has come back and returned, and they'll be back in the next quarter. So anytime, and what we find too with the creative testing, the brands that have been on addressable are the ones that are doing the unique testing techniques with it. And it's definitely something that we get excited to partner on.
Very cool. I'm curious, in any of these campaigns, or perhaps in others, have you seen people layering first-party address data on top of the campaigns, or are they still mostly buying third-party household data to decide who they're going to advertise to?
For us, it's definitely a mix. I mean, we have our set-top box data that we leverage across all the campaigns, naturally. That's how you build the target. And then, we have partnerships with a vast amount of data partners from Experian, Epsilon, Newstar, and we also have brands that have their own first-party data. So it's really a mix, and I think when you think about it from being a marketer myself, knowing that we have our own data that we can match against, I always think that's a great way to start. But I mean, the data partners, the expansion of what they have to offer is really great. So I'd say it's a mix between.
Anybody, high brand data usage, or mostly other sources?
We mostly use, I'd say, it depends on the brand for sure. Like an e-commerce client, we tend to use a lot of first-party data because naturally there's a lot of data associated with that. However, for a lot of our CPG and financial brands, we find it a lot easier to just use third-party data because it's more readily available. I think you have to be very cautious with it, as with anything, because you don't necessarily know what you're getting sometimes. So I think the more critical you could be in exactly what you're using is oftentimes for the better.
Yeah, combination here as well, and I think it was well said.
Very good. So even though Natalie mentioned, they started addressable 5 years ago, it's certainly still considered new and advanced. And along with that can come some misconceptions. What sorts of things have you guys heard that people either want to do that addressable can't, or things that people say, I didn't think addressable can do that, but it really can? Max, why don't you start us in?
Sure, switching it up. So I think I don't know if this is a misconception, but the common thought about addressable, and I've already heard it a couple times, is that you can't achieve reach or you can't achieve scale. And with that, obviously, that it's expensive. But I think the reality of this situation is, you need to think about it in a way that you shouldn't be throwing all of your eggs in one basket. Like, you shouldn't only do addressable. You shouldn't only do linear. You should be thinking about your marketing strategy in terms of a holistic view. Like, think first about what you want to achieve, and then define how you're going to get there and what you're going to do to measure that success. Because at the end of the day, we've actually found that a combined solution between addressable and linear, all these things achieve a different objective. So an addressable space we've found has delivered a lot more sale at shelf or delivered a lot more engagement from our consumers because we're reaching a specific audience. However, linear tends to provide more awareness and broad reach. So I think you really need to be critical about what your objectives are and go from there, because, you know, if you throw all of your eggs in one basket and it fails, you're kind of SOL at the end of the day anyway. So it's generally better to diversify your portfolio and try to think about your marketing strategy across your different objectives.
I would agree with Max on that. And I think, you know, the two things are the expense that people talk about, and then from the seller side, you know, the no waste kind of offsets that. And I think there's, you know, arguments that could be had on both sides of that. And the scale portion of it, I think it's relative, you know. So in our space, you know, if you look at scale in reach terms, yes, you're kind of boxed in. But if you talk scale and spend terms, you can generate some significant return on ad sales, which we've seen here. So I think it will vary by marketer and what the client objectives are. The other misconception that I've kind of heard is people kind of view it as an optimizer, kind of like a programmatic buy would be in you know, in our spaces specifically, sometimes we need to explain to the clients a little bit about the ambiguity of the viewer. With the household level targeting, they get a little too excited and think it is that one-to-one to the individual. So it's still the household they want to be in. So it's still a good play, but those are kind of some of the things that we run across.
Yeah, and I can touch a little bit more. I mean, on this for scale. I mean, we've been talking about it this entire week, and honestly, the 57 million, that was higher than the last I heard. So, but I think that just goes to show the growth opportunity, and it's a growth engine, and it's going to continue to grow. You know, we've only been around for 5 years, and I know on our end, Dish is doing everything we can to help grow and scale our platform. In fact, we are currently testing addressability on Sling, which is huge for us, and you know, it provides that live OTT opportunity for brands that, you know, we've heard a lot about the limitations of Hulu and Roku as far as from the brand's perspective this last week. So I think that you know, once it's fine-tuned, it's going to be a really great opportunity for that.
Very good. So, having dispelled some misconceptions, you know, with anything new, you know, it's kind of shiny, and there's going to be people who are like, I'm not sure I want to touch that. But there's also going to be people who want to dive in, and maybe there are pitfalls or things that happen. So, can you give either examples or broad advice for mistakes that can be made or that you've seen be made that make people who were excited about the platform, you know, think twice, and how those could be avoided or leveraged?
I'll lead off. I mean, again, just relative to our space, so it's kind of, you know, it's looked at a little bit backwards. I think a lot of the frequency and flighting and the universe drives the budget, right? Which is sometimes backwards thinking for some marketers. And you know, the pitfalls where I think that we've seen it kind of not pan out is the frequency can vary by what the marketer's objectives are, again, or trying to sell, and they could shortchange themselves in terms of what they need for a particular buy. And I've seen it go the other way as well, where they kind of have overspent. So, you know, as an agency, that's our job to kind of reel that in and offer the, you know, the advice that we see best fit for each scenario. But those are kind of some of the things that I've seen. I don't know what you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I'll piggyback off of that. I mean, for us, for our teams that are out in market, educating the industry about addressable, it's really having that transparent conversation. And the first thing for brands and when you're building a plan, know your targets, understand your targets. And our team is well equipped to help define and show, you know, the best possible solution based on what your end goals are. I can say, you know, for brands that have come in that have been hesitant, whether it's they're gun shy from the price point or they're unsure on, you know, what kind of reporting they'll get on the back end, we always say, let's test it out. Let's supplement your linear buy and add in addressable. You don't need deep pockets to test addressable. You know, I think especially for direct response advertisers, we've ran several campaigns with some, you know, both large, medium, and smaller brands on the DR side. And what we find, and we do a kind of comparison of year over year, saying, okay, here's what you spent on linear last year. Here's the effective CPM that we got you this year. Let's show you results. And what we've seen is that those eyeballs are so much more valuable, and they drive action, which is ultimately what the direct response, that's all about business. So that's really part of our messaging, and not just for DR, but general market as well. But most of the major general market advertisers have been in the addressable space for a while. So it's just re-educating those brands across the verticals that haven't dived in, and go from there.
Yeah, I totally hit the nail. Natalie totally hit the nail on the head. And we had a client recently come to us and ask us to layer in addressable because they'd heard about it. So that's a very classic situation, I think, as someone who wants to dive in without really doing the research. And we had to kind of walk them off the plank a little bit because we didn't necessarily think that investing all of their dollars in addressable was the right solution for their brand, because they hadn't finished all of their target segmentation work. They didn't know a ton about their consumer. They were suffering from low awareness. It was a classic situation where you just want to get reach and you want to deliver your, you want to deliver your ad, I think, out there. And one of the, just to get people to see it, and if you don't have a well-defined target audience and you don't necessarily know what your end solution is going to be, addressable may be not the right fit for you right now, because I think one of the important things when you think about excluding audiences is you need to know why you're excluding them, and you need to understand the purpose in doing that, because if you're going to get into this very targeted sort of space, there's a lot of benefits to it if you build it smartly.
Well, I'd say, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just to piggyback on the brand awareness piece. I think one of the misconceptions is that addressable is hyper targeted, which it can be, but also it can be thinly targeted. When you have a brand that you don't want to hit a certain age group, you can cut that out seamlessly. And then if you're still trying to get to know your brand, we'll layer on a brand health study with it. And that's the beauty of having, extensive relationships with brand partners. So though I do agree maybe addressable isn't for everyone, I do encourage testing because it could be valuable just depending on what your end goal is.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I mean, it's just relative, I think, a little bit to the universe size, right? So if you get a universe size that's so big, you can go to linear for a third of the CPM, so it's like it might make sense then to buy linear if you're not targeted enough.
Right.
I'm curious, we heard earlier that, addressable might be good specifically for campaign fundraising or whatever. Is there an objective that you think specifically addressable would make sense for? The answer may be no, but something that people want to do that you'd say, really addressable, can't help you with this.
The way that my view on it is that it is more niche than mass, but I guess there could be some naysayers for that. The classic example when I talk to clients about it is, if you're marketing toilet paper, you don't really need to do addressable advertising, so that's kind of, and I've heard toothpaste mentioned today and the differences, or this week, so that's kind of my viewpoint on it, but there's
How
always...
many brands of toilet paper are there in the universe? Again,
I don't know.
competitive.
Yeah.
I don't know the answers.
No,
but that's the point.
And
yeah.
That's another angle. You can go after, if you can identify who your competitors' targets are, that's another idea for a campaign, right? So, it could work, but I think it's just a simple analogy more than anything.
Very good. Well, a little bit ago, the notion of combining addressable with a brand awareness study came up, and that kind of speaks more broadly to metrics. And so I'm curious to find out, when you do an addressable campaign, do you want to look at the same metrics as your other TV buys, or does that give you feedback that actually undermines understanding how well your campaign did, and what sort of metrics are the same or different?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think that's a tough question. I think you should be measuring. I think in a perfect world, we would measure everything, and we would, have an end goal. We would measure sales lift. We would also measure awareness. We'd also measure, engagement, all that type of stuff. I think if you're doing an awareness study on a national linear buy, and then you're also doing an awareness study on addressable, depending on your audience, I think in general we've found that awareness tends to raise more with linear naturally because you're reaching a wider audience, you're getting your message out there to a more eclectic group of people versus your addressable buy where you're targeting a specific, more specific than your national spot. I think, don't go into addressable assuming that you're going to achieve all the same solutions that you're going to get with linear, and then go 6 steps past it, because that's not the right way to think about it. I think you need to build a measurement strategy that is unique to each channel, to the extent you're able to in the budgets that you have, of course.
I mean, a lot of what we do is response driven already. So for us, it's more just getting the client comfortable with, taking their eyes off of like the hard and fast KPI and looking at it more holistically, to try to dive into maybe lifetime value or average cost per sale went up, or, so there's different things that we look at that we just need to get away from. If we have an advertiser that's really traditional DR, which was the case that I used earlier, they analyze on a cost per order basis, right? So we have to get them off of that going into this and saying, look, there's going to be a bigger halo effect, or, there's multiple things that we try to get them to look at. So more of a holistic approach, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, just the one thing I'll add is speaking TV reporting from a linear to an addressable. I mean, with addressable, you get the reach and frequency. You see where your ad goes by network, and then, but it also goes beyond that, and that's the beauty of addressable, that you're able to measure sales lift and attribution and brand awareness, and so it's definitely it's measurement on steroids. So there's definitely a big difference, but there's the baseline, but then it gets enhanced with addressable. And I think the measurement on addressable pairs nicely with digital measurement, which is why it's such a great fit.
Very good. How are we doing on time out there? It feels like we're just getting started. Very good. We're doing all right. Yeah. So talking about those metrics, one question that comes to mind, you've talked a lot about how, if you're just doing linear and you're hitting everyone, then obviously your brand awareness is going to be more broad, because you can just hope that any random person will be more aware of the brand. Do you have any examples of clients who have come to the table ready to change their, knowing that they're going to measure something different, or is that something that you would recommend and like to see more of? 10 minutes.
It's in our space. I would say no. I mean, brand awareness is something that we have brand response clients that primarily we push through linear. We use this as an extension. I think there is some key takeaways for them more in, like Natalie kind of mentioned, reverse engineering a media plan. On the post buy, you do get a nice level of analysis that you can use to gain some insight into the linear plan.
All right. So talking a little bit more, maybe diving into a little bit of a wish list here. So, everybody's got their own background and what they've seen. So from a network, direct response, broad media base, what sort of a campaign would you like to see? Or maybe there was a client that came in and didn't do addressable, but you had a vision of how it could work.
I think one of the coolest things, and Natalie kind of touched on this, is the idea of ability to put multiple creative into market and kind of tailor your audience to each creative. And I think in a perfect world, we'd be able to differentiate creative by different objectives and different households and everything like that. And I think a perfect media plan would be able to test all of that stuff out, be it through maybe one's very focused on direct response and you have another one that's very awareness focused. Maybe one's very competitive focused and another is very, trying to get more trial within your current market. So I think in a perfect world, we'd be able to implement all of that at the same time with a positive measurement strategy and a really good, media plan that it sort of, is integrated between linear and addressable. But that's not the reality of the situation in our industry. Is very build the plane as you fly it sometimes. So I've never seen that happen, but I think, to the extent we can be testing and learning, and one of the really cool things about addressable is that we're able to differentiate that data now so that we can see how this creative performs over this creative or this target audience performs over this target audience, and it's becoming more digitized, as it were. So that's where I think the real value is going to be in the future, is to the extent that we can match to that ability to diversify our creative and our targeting and our objectives.
I would agree with that, and I think the level of reporting will continue to get quicker in the turn time, post-campaign analysis, and then maybe even greater detail into some of the shows that the advertisers running in and things like that just really aren't there yet, but I think that'll come with the tech. So yeah, I would agree with Max and kind of just add that on top.
Yeah, and I think, well, touching on the two things you guys would wish for, I would definitely say there's pieces of that are already happening. I think from show level reporting, I think the beauty of addressable is it doesn't matter what or where they're watching, and you were targeting the right audience, and the ads only serve to the household that when the set-top box is on, and the measurement accounts for the likelihood of someone going to the restroom or going to the kitchen. And so things like that are already happening and definitely will improve as we move forward. And my example of creative testing, there's many other layers of creative testing that can be done. I mean, they operationally wise, we don't want to get too technical, but they ran as different campaigns, but across the same flight window, 100%. I think the more we do that, and I think it will come with time. My wish list, there's verticals that are just getting their feet wet with addressable, so I'd love to see that number emerge as we move forward. And direct response is definitely on my wish list, and along with QSR and travel. So that's kind of our short list right now. And then just building the awareness of Sling and the opportunity on that when it comes to addressable. I think we have a really huge opportunity there. So that's it. Yeah.
You just mentioned show level reporting, and this may be our last question here before we get into the roundtables. With the notion that you're targeting the right household, you might start to think, well, that the show doesn't matter or it matters less. And do you have any experience showing that it in fact does matter, or that you have intuition that just because you're hitting the right audience, you still want to match up your message when people are in a particular frame of mind?
From our perspective, I just think that the clients are making the investment. The return is what they're after, but they want to see the nuts and bolts in between sometimes. So it's more of that. I'm not saying that the show, like I agree, it's household targeting, right? But just being able to report that back is just something that clients have asked for on my side.
Yeah, I totally. Sorry, I think it's actually very important, and I hope that we don't lose that, because context is huge. I think if you're serving I don't know, if you're serving a restaurant ad for food in the middle of a fix your car type of thing, you might get turned off at that idea because you're talking about oil and engines and stuff like that. That's not a perfect example, but context is everything, and where your ad is being placed is very important. And I think as we start to get more granular in the weeds of defining our target audiences and stuff like that, we still need to be getting in the weeds of where our ad is being placed and validating that it's right for our audience, right for our brand, right for our message, because that stuff's important. So.
Absolutely, and I think if you want to get in Monday Night Football, you can definitely do that, and that's more of like a linear play. And I definitely don't downplay content, because it's extremely important context to to brands, but at the same point too, that just ties back. I feel like the common theme of what we've been talking about, defining your target and what your campaign objectives are. At the same time, you can have both. You can be in Monday Night Football and also hit your target when they're watching Fox News. You know, it's like I think it goes back to tying back on what your objectives are.
Very good. Well, before we roll into the roundtable then, is there any parting shot that you want to make sure everybody hears before we get into small groups? Maybe you don't.
I mean, I would say to the agencies and brands, some of which that we got to have some time the last couple days, I would just encourage you, if you haven't done Addressable, to test it. Work with your brands, work with your agencies, and agencies, you know, work with us to really identify and educate yourselves on Addressable. And the more you test, the more you know. And that's what I say.
Totally, I would agree with that. Just don't be afraid to test, get your feet wet, learn a little bit. You never know, you might end up being really successful. So.
Completely agree with both of them.
Give it a try. That's the message. All right. Thank you, guys.
All right, Noah, panel, thank you very much. We are going to break into roundtables. Does anyone have any questions? You do? Okay, let's have a question here, and then we'll.
So, I'm Trisha Wolfer from Empower. My question for you guys is, we've talked a lot about Addressable, but the one thing we really haven't talked about or touched on, especially for the brands and the agencies in the room, how long do we need to prepare to plan for an Addressable campaign? I mean, it's not something that we can just do today and start tomorrow. So just realistically, how long do you think that we need? Because I'll be honest, planning for an Addressable campaign right now, and that's been going on for 6 weeks. So just with like the data pass and getting the matches and stuff like that. So realistically, if you can give us an idea, that would be great.
The last campaign that I did, or the most recent one, took 4 months, but it was pretty heavy with first-party data, and there was a lot of back and forth with the data house. So it's just that initial planning aspect of it. In terms of working with the plan on the sell side, it's pretty fluid, right? It's just getting the data to the point where everyone's comfortable with it, and then I think, as your co-part said, trust the data. Yep. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. We had a situation where we had to be in market in like 6 weeks, and there was not a lot of sleeping happening during that period of time. So I think in a perfect world, you allot 6 months ahead. You at least want to be a quarter or two ahead of where you want to be, for sure.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we find and what we're working with our data partners are building the matches, because I do think that's where everyone agrees there's room for improvement. As far as planning goes, I mean, quarterly, you guys, know better than I do, but I think knowing that getting down the leg time prior and then post-campaign as well. Obviously, each brand has different attribution windows for that testing, but I definitely think there's room to trim.
Yeah, in a closed-loop ROI process, which we have going on with a client right now, it takes a few weeks, like 6 weeks. So we're already starting the planning of the next buy. It may not come to fruition if they don't agree with the metrics of the closed-loop ROI process, but we've already started getting that going. So I think we're just working ahead and sparking the conversations as early as you can are good to do.
When you're planning a campaign, do you find that there are, I guess, learning, or that you get in a flow, so that it doesn't, if the same campaign that just took 4 months were to do it again, would it take the same 4 months, or would it be a lot faster?
No, there would be less lead time. Yeah, we could make it turn quicker.
Okay. All right, if there's no more questions, again, thanks, guys, for a great panel. And to continue the conversation on Addressable, Noah, you're going to be leading the roundtable right now, right back there. So we have 2 roundtables for you guys to participate in. We've got the Solving for Addressable right back here.